Welcome to the Ignorance is Strength podcast. I'm your host, Fabian motherfucking Ojeda, and I don't know shit, but that's okay. All right, let's get this shit started. Thank you everybody for listening to the Ignorance is Strength podcast. Hope you all enjoyed episode number 86, the return of Astro Monica. And, we had a good conversation about homelessness and mental health. And, I think especially for those of us living out in California, definitely need to open up those conversations as long as we're doing, some solution finding and less general bitching for no reason. But we're back today with a brand new guest. I really want to thank him ahead of time for, putting a very interesting story out there, being vulnerable and telling us, what it's like. But we have an interesting guest today, brand new guest, Mr. Joel Carroll. How are you doing, Joel?
I'm well, man. Grateful to be here. Thank you.
Definitely. And so you're joining us. You wrote a book about everything that you've experienced in your life, right? And so we'll talk a lot about that. But reading through your bio, as I mentioned to you before we started recording, there's so much meat on the bone to really pick there, right? And so you've lived quite a life, and we're kind of running wild for a very long time, and you've managed to turn it all around, and you're in a good place now, right? So it's the thing that really good books are made of, that good stories, good film even is made of, right? And so I want to get you to tell that story, and share as much as you want to share. And on a bigger, grander scale, and I'm sure you've seen this before, I'm hoping that maybe it'll help somebody out even, when you're able to tell a story like yours that's relatable to some. Maybe people are a little bit hesitant to talk about these things or ashamed to talk about these things. When people like you are open about it and willing to share, a lot of times it does help. So let's just jump right into it, man. So give us a little bit of your background there, and start from as early as you want to share.
I appreciate that. So I was born in 1978, and my father was in the military. Mm-hmm. So I was born in Phoenix, Arizona, moved to Virginia when I was real young, and then moved to Europe in 1983. When I was in Europe as a kid, I was a good kid, played soccer. I was in a Mickey Mouse commercial in Amsterdam. Life was good. Went skiing in Austria, the Alps. And life was good. But I was also a very curious child. Mm. So about 6 years old, I started stealing. Mm. When my mother didn't give me any guilders, which is the Dutch coin that they had back in the early 80s. I started stealing at the age of 6. And then I started to see shadows. We lived by a graveyard, and we passed it every day before we went to school, my older sister and I and the kids in the neighborhood. And I always felt like something was tugging at me. And I was born on Friday the 13th on a weekend of full moon back in October. Oh, wow. So I always thought about, that movie just came out in the early 80s. And I was like, man, Friday the 13th, it's a bad omen. And, but I always felt like something was pulling me towards that graveyard, and other kids seemed to not let it bother them, but it really did, get me to gravitate towards, sitting there and staring at this old, it wasn't even in English, the gravestones. Mm-hmm. So I ended up seeing some shadows coming from there one night. And I also saw a demonic entity when my father was TDY, and it was just my mother and my sister at home. And I thought somebody was looking over me in my room, and I had a demon in my room. I pinched myself and I wet the bed, and I was afraid to tell anybody at school the next day, but I was going to tell my best friend, Michael. Mm-hmm. But when I was about to tell him on the bus stopped and he got off, and I waved to him, but that was the last time I saw my buddy. He ended up passing away that day. About 2 hours later in his front yard, he got stung in his throat by a bee that was in his juice. Yeesh. And he passed away. So my mom talked about God. My dad, not so much. But I would pray, I would pray to God, mm-hmm. And no light shined down on my bed, and no voice came down saying, this is why Michael died. Mm-hmm. This is why you're being tormented by evil. The things that I was doing in the neighborhood, getting in trouble when I was just curious and had nothing to do. So I had a lot of questions, and then we moved back to Phoenix, and in Phoenix, in the late '80s, I ended up learning that I had rage
Hmm.
by from being bullied. I had a lot of friends everywhere I went. I had a lot of anxiety because my father was military,
Mm-hmm.
and at the drop of a dime, we would pack our stuff and we would fly across the country or fly across the world. And everything that I had created in my little world was taken away, and I was very depressed about it every single time.
Mm-hmm.
And because I love sports, though, it would go away pretty quickly within the first month or two everywhere I moved because I gravitated towards sports. And I got picked on, and then my buddies were like, "Yeah, this is out in Phoenix," and they were like, "Yeah, you're gonna go fight this dude." And I'm a teeny guy, man. I'm
Mm-hmm.
43 years old. If I shave my beard, I'll look like I'm 19, which is a blessing today. But as a child, it's not so much a blessing. You know, people
Mm-hmm.
make fun of me. I had buck teeth, rat tail. People call me Beaver Boy, can opener. And one day after school by the ice cream truck, you know, my buddies were like, "You're gonna fight this kid. You're gonna fight him." And he was another little kid. You know, same stature, same everything. He just had blonde hair, blue eyes.
Mm-hmm.
And they pushed me into the circle at the golf course, and I was nervous, man. I was scared, and I didn't show it. And my favorite movie back then was Karate Kid.
Yeah.
They had 60 kids, you know, 50, 60 kids on this tee off green at the golf course, and they're all cheering. And I get up to do the crane kick, man, and they all start laughing. And when the kid ran at me, I thought I kicked him in the face, like I visioned it happening, and it didn't happen. I fell on my back.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody laughed at me. They started making fun of me. But everything went quiet.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't remember what happened, you know, but what I do know is they were dragging me by my backpack, and that kid was laying on the tee off green. The police were at the school the next morning saying I picked up a painted rock from the tee off green and I tried to kill him with it.
Oh.
You know, so I'm a nice person. You know, I'm
Mm-hmm.
very I used to be very passive, a yes man, just so I please other people.
Mm-hmm.
That's not healthy either. But I was always kind to everybody until something irritates me. And when I'm uncomfortable, that's when it comes out. And that
Mm-hmm.
was 33 years ago.
Would you say at that point you just kind of like that's your first instance of maybe just snapping, or
Yeah.
had there been something previous to that?
First time ever, man. Didn't even know what the heck happened. And it
Mm-hmm.
happened the next day.
Oh.
The police talked to my mother. My father was TDY again. My mother left work, went to the office, talked to the principals. My buddies are pointing me out to the other cops. And I'm like, what the heck are they doing? Because I truly, to this day, I don't remember it.
Mm-hmm.
And they put me in school suspension, third grade, in this little cubicle in the office, you know, and I leave, and it's all bright outside. These two kids, his friends, were making fun of me like, "You want to be Karate Kid, you're a weirdo, you're a freak." And I was just trying to like look around for my little girlfriends and my buddies that we rode bikes after school, and I just wanted them to leave me alone, man. And the more they talked and the more they were calling my mom names, and they were just mean little kids, man, I just started to change. I could feel it in my toenails all the way up through my ankles.
Mm-hmm.
By the time it reached my heart, I just chased them, and I chased them to an abandoned house. I'm in the neighborhood. They slammed the door on my fingers, but I wasn't crying because of the pain.
Mm-hmm.
I was crying because that's what happens when I get mad. I start to cry, not like
Right.
bawling, but I start tearing up, and it just something happens to me. And I punched through the living room window, and I pulled a kid out, and I was trying to stab him in the head with glass. Got blood all over me, and it got stuck in my wrist. And
And so you're saying third grade, this is 8, 9 years old.
yeah,
Huh. So not really knowing how to process what's going on, and uh, because it's at this point, it essentially, you know, all you know is you know, just ridicule and hate. You know, it seems, you know, it's little kids can be cruel, man, but that's 8, 9 years old. That's very young to, you know, start experiencing things like that. So you know, I've had bits of anger, but I've never blanked out with rage like that. So that's, you know, that's definitely something new to me. But yeah, I mean, this went on for a while, huh?
so those two instances were the first and second instances, but it didn't happen for years
Okay.
until I got into high school. And then I started, you know, drinking, played sports, played basketball, and that was my life. Baseball cards, basketball cards, football cards. I could break down stats with any adult. Like I was just, sports was my life, and it helped me to cope with whatever was going on, you know, inside my head.
Mhm.
Um, life was good. I mean, my parents were alcoholics. My dad worked at the Pentagon, had a nice home.
Mhm.
You know, my mother always worked at a bank. Whether it was in Europe or wherever in the States or a grocery store, she ended up being a manager everywhere. But they would come home and they would get hammered, man.
Mhm.
You know, they were able to do that. They were able to drink and show up and go to work early every single day.
So they were functional.
Functional alcoholics, man. And
Yeah.
I didn't know anything about alcohol as a child. All I knew is when we visited family in Phoenix or Tucson or Mexico, that they would be give us money and say, "Don't come back till it's dark," so they could party.
Mm. Yeah. You're talking. So you're talking about the adults who just give you like a bunch of money, you and your, I'm assuming your cousins or
Correct.
whoever you went to visit, and it's just like, go out, do something for the whole day, and we'll be here getting drunk.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep, that's what they would
Oh.
do, and they worked very hard. You know,
Mm-hmm.
extremely hard. But I
Mm-hmm.
never looked at it, you know, alcohol for what it really was. You know, I was terrified. My mother smoked cigarettes. My dad chewed. I would throw my mom's cigarettes in the trash, full cartons,
Mm-hmm.
and they would find them in there because I didn't want her to die from cancer. You know, I'm a mama's boy, man. Still to this
Yeah.
day, I'm a mama's boy, man. So,
Did
um,
did the alcohol abuse, like, did that kind of at all, struck a chord in you, like, okay, maybe, my parents are different people when they're drunk? Or, I mean, you mentioned they were functional, they were able to go to work, but did they change, like, as far as their personality? I grew up, in a household where there was alcohol abuse, and it was a scary thing because, things start to get a little more violent and, unstable and whatnot. Or were your parents just cool? Like, they're just like, they're doing their thing, and I mean, they might be abusing that alcohol, but it's not coming down on you or anything.
I never knew my parents to be sober, so I didn't know the difference.
I see. Okay. So it was so often that you're like, that's just who they are.
That's just who they are. A loving home.
Mm-hmm.
You know, some kids are locked down in their home after school. My neighbor in Virginia, in one of the houses, you know, Christian family, they didn't even allow their kids to go to school. They did homeschooling, a bunch of kids.
Mm-hmm.
You know, for my family, it was, you love basketball, here's a ball, you know, go play. And they would give my sister and I a long leash, and eventually that leash snapped.
Yeah.
And I damn near went missing for 20 years.
Wow. So that happened during your high school years, or was that after?
High school years is when I went out for the basketball team. Basketball ended up being my favorite sport. I was walked into high school very intimidated. You know, the girls there from middle school to high school was a huge change, and it was like they were the women in my daddy's Playboy magazines I used to steal as a 12-year-old.
Uh-huh.
And I went in there, and there was like gangs, and it was segregated, and there's thousands of kids, and I was like this little dude standing in an ocean of humans, and I'm very afraid. And I didn't go to high school with my friends. You know, a
Mm-hmm.
situation happened where I wasn't allowed to go to my sister's high school because of school zoning, and that was depression and anxiety all over again, man. Like, finally got my friends, and everything's cool, and they're going over here. I'm going 9 miles that way, and I have no idea like who I'm about to meet and what everything's about. So went out for high school basketball. I played AAU ball. I played boys and girls club basketball, and I can play. I was never the greatest on the team, you know, but I wasn't the worst.
Mm-hmm.
And I got cut the first day. They're looking at me like, "Yeah, what the hell are you even doing on this court?" You know what I mean? Like, okay, bye. So that really depressed me, man. And I ended up stealing my mom and dad's liquor out of their cabinet one morning because everybody, not everybody, a lot of kids I noticed were drinking, smoking pot, doing LSD, you know, off grounds and on grounds. And I said, you know what? My parents have been doing this their whole life.
Mm-hmm.
I'm super depressed. Basketball is not going to be my thing. Instead of trying to get better, I basically gave up, and I poured their liquor into a thermos, went to my mom's ashtray where by the fireplace, and I grabbed all her half of her Marlboro Light 100s because you'd put them half out. So I put them in a sandwich bag, went to the bus stop, lit up a cigarette, and drank my first shot of liquor at 6:50 in the morning, and that ended up being a 2-decade-long battle.
So that was a pretty significant moment right there.
Yeah, and I lost my virginity to my neighbor,
That same night.
and not the same day, but it was within like that few months, and that was it. No more baseball cards. You can say that.
Right. So now you're entering like this. You're that's your metamorphosis right there, right? You're going from this kid who lost his passion to, this guy that's growing up and experiencing, some interesting new things.
Yeah, and immediately I became intrigued, and it gave me a confidence that I never knew of. And it was something that I ended up doing every single day before I went to school.
Mm-hmm.
If I went to play basketball at the gym with one of my buddies from the other school, my best friend at that time, I would sit down when we would play on the one half court was a bunch of scrubs. We'd be over there playing on three different hoops, 3-on-3 games.
Mm-hmm.
But the ballers would be on the other side doing full court games. And I would sit back with my juice or my snack, and I'd sit on the bleachers and I'd start watching them. And I really appreciated and respected how they carried themselves. They'd have beautiful females walking in, giving them hugs. Young men would come in and show them love. And I was like, man, that's something you see on TV. I like how that is. That'd be cool if I could, run with them one day.
Mm-hmm.
So that same day, I'm dribbling my ball and I'm going home about a mile away. And I go in, there's a car that I don't recognize at my parents' house. And I walk in, take my shoes off, put the ball down. And two of those guys on that court were sitting on my parents' couch with my sister. And my dad's like, JR, come here, man. Want you to meet Mandy's boyfriend. And I went in there, and that changed my life, because he was like, you keep practicing, little dude, you can run with us. And earlier I was like, man, I wish I could run with them. And he told me they didn't want me to get gang affiliated by any means. He respected my father, working at the Pentagon, respected my mom because she was a kind person and she wasn't racist.
Mm-hmm.
And he put me under his wing, man. And one thing led to another. I found a beautiful girl in high school, ended up dating her, going to her house after school every day instead of mine.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of gang members in that area. And when I would be walking up and down the street with her, going to 7-Eleven or something, I'd have guys know who I am because my sister's boyfriend, and they would test me, and they would get out the car with ski masks on, put guns to my head, scare me from the neighborhood, man. Put a gun in my mouth. And another occasion, my girlfriend's trying to pull me by my hoodie, but I'm just walking in the middle of the road because I don't want to show my fear, because the second I met him and I knew I wasn't going to play sports, I knew I wanted to be affiliated, because I wanted to make it, for some reason in my life, I've always wanted to make a name for myself. Mm-hmm. And I was very tenacious. Mm-hmm. You're talking about a 4'11" kid that's 80 pounds. I was about to enter a world that I had an understanding about, but not to the detail in which that it ended up turning out.
Mm. Yeah, so you're in your eyes, you're at a deficit, and you want to be this grand figure, right? You want to make an impact, and you want people to know who you are, and I understand that. You maybe this 4'11" is pretty short there for at that point, right?
Teeny little guy, man. Yeah, teeny. Uh-huh. So I ended up dating her, and she had the same last name I did, so people thought we were married. And I started, some guys that were at the gym that also went to the high school, I started to hang out with. And like one by one, they would get affiliated. But they were getting affiliated to the gang that I wanted to be affiliated with. And immediately they changed their tone with me. And I understood why, because once they became part of that family, they couldn't talk to me like they did before. I wasn't hanging out at their house at certain times. Hey, bro, you could come over, but in an hour you got to bounce. And started smoking weed, and immediately after smoking weed, I started smoking formaldehyde. After school, embalming fluid. We would drive across the bridge to DC, dip our Newport cigarettes in some embalming fluid, let it dry out. We'd smoke that. So I immediately was drinking every day, smoking weed, and smoking formaldehyde. And I started.
Sorry, man, is that a common practice? Because I've actually never heard of that.
They call it Sherm on the West Coast.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's just called water, buck naked, the wet, illy momo. But yeah, once I would put something in my system, man, it's like, my hereditary, like my parents drank for decades. And it almost killed my mom, and my dad quit because he wanted to save her as well. But yeah, so I was doing that, and then in that neighborhood, instead of being home, and my parents think I'm still this good kid playing basketball till 9:30 at night and then coming home. But because I was meeting more people, and because I was drinking now and I was talking to people, I had a confidence about myself, and they knew me from the basketball court, my girlfriend's neighborhood, and then my sister's boyfriend. More and more people got to acknowledge who I was. Like, why is this little dude walking around this hood? He's not leaving. So and so put a gun to his head. He's still coming around. People are selling a lot of weed. So I wanted to start doing that, sit at the corner, pit bulls, people coming up on their street bikes and stuff. And it was just a lifestyle that I was really infatuated with. And I went to get affiliated one time without my sister's boyfriend knowing, and there was a bunch of guys. I went up there, man, and he was like, "Are we allowed to cuss on here?"
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah, he was like, "What the fuck you going to bring to the table?" By the time I could open my mouth, somebody pushed him out the way and hit me square in my temple, flush. I'd never been hit before in my life. And it debilitated me. And I'm colorblind, red, green colorblind. And I saw purple out of one eye for like hours, and orange out of another eye for hours. I couldn't open my mouth for almost a week. Just one punch from one of these dudes. And he wasn't even a man yet. He was a young man. And they sent me away. They said, you know what? You're out of your league, man. Bounce. Get the hell up out of here. But I was very tenacious, man. So in high school, if something would happen to one of the other guys that I used to hang out with on the court, they would get into it with somebody. I felt disrespected when that other person wouldn't listen to me, and I'd end up causing violence, physical violence on these people. And when I started doing that and introducing small gangs to the big gang, eventually I got affiliated, man. And man, that's why I wrote this book. The things I've seen, the things I witnessed, the death, the acts of violence that I've done on people, and the karma that came along with that. I've robbed jewelry stores when I found out I was going to have a daughter. Went on a run. My father almost lost his security clearance at the Pentagon.
Oh,
that was the best thing I ever did for anybody else at that point in my life, was being unselfish. And as a young man going around the country doing dope, catching STDs and not caring, my self-will just continued to run wild, man. And it all stemmed from me never sitting down and talking about it with anybody because my ego and my pride wouldn't allow me to. I got, they gave me a name, my alias, which was perfect for my life, was Omen, Omen. I was born on Friday the 13th on the weekend of a full moon. Bad things happen when people irritate me. Yeah, a good, it's like a prophetic meaning, prophetic balance between good and evil. And here I am, my name's biblical, and then my alias is, whatever I want it to be. So I would just drink and smoke formaldehyde, smoke weed. I got through a lot of trouble in school. So my parents pulled me out of school the same night I committed the most violent acts I've ever done in my life. I was still in high school against rival gang members, and they pulled me from school. They're like, your mom's scared to death. We don't know what to do with you. You're not in high school anymore, and you're going to Arizona.
What grade was that?
10th.
10th grade. Okay, so you're still barely in there.
I don't even like school, man. I'd go in there and try to get females' panties while they're in class. I was in love with the female, but I guess I wasn't because, I was, but the alcohol wouldn't allow me to be a good person. The drugs wouldn't allow me to be my authentic self. So that relationship was in turmoil. I had a lot of beef with a lot of different guys because she was a beautiful female and a really nice female that had a great personality, but they saw my demise and my self-destruction, so they would move in. And that's what I thought about. My parents said, you're going to Apache Junction, Arizona. And I'm like, with who? And they're like, your grandparents. I'm like, I'm not going anywhere. But then my spirit told me while sitting on the couch, and I remember looking in the fireplace, and I was just like, look at all this stuff you just did, like, within the last 4 hours in Northern Virginia. Like, it's good if you get out of here. Because I've been told on by my friends in Phoenix, and then I also got told on by some kids in Virginia when I was in middle school for something that they did. And I went to Arizona, and that was just self-will run wild, man. I stole my grandparents' guns when they were taking care of me. I got picked up by other family, got passed around the state. in an attempt to try to save me on my parents' behalf.
Mm.
And all I did was run around, have sex with a bunch of females. I ended up huffing spray paint.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I did get my GED, and I did get my first job at Little Caesars back in '97, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
And then I went to Tucson and started doing methamphetamine, and that right there is just a different story. And it
I
took me
mean,
to what's that?
I mean, yeah, just listening, it sounds like, you were still, though you were running wild like 10th grade and everything like that, and they were moving you, to and from. It sounded like me like you still had, some sort of sense and conscious, and something was still telling you like, nah, man, you're not gonna put yourself in a bad spot. Go listen to what your parents have to say, and you still, you did it, and that's because you listened to some sense in your head, right? So you weren't completely overtaken at that point, it seems, right? You still had, some sort of guidance, it seems.
There was while you're saying that, and I still have them. I got goosebumps all over my body. So I did have spirits around me the entire time.
Mm.
And I have that sixth sense, and I would battle within myself. I knew good from wrong. Was it a cry for help? I don't know. Was it that I was still trying to make a name for myself in different states? I would just walk into different neighborhoods if I was drunk or high. I would just go sit on somebody's car while they're out there rolling dice, and I would just start drinking with them. And I got some money, you know what I mean, which y'all got, and I would just fit in with everybody. It didn't matter, and I was just one of those guys that would just kind of travel and with a backpack and
Mm-hmm.
just pop up in different people's homes. When I wrote my book and I did my 12 steps in recovery, which was soul searching, and it helped me to really break down my timeline. I counted over 48 different families I lived with.
Wow.
The entire time, brother, I had a loving family at home.
Mm-hmm.
The entire time. And you're talking Florida, Louisiana, Arizona, DC, Maryland, like all these places. And the whole time I had a home,
Mm-hmm.
a clean home with good food, wood in the fireplace. So basically, I was a runaway, man. I just ran away and tried to find something that ended up not being there. And I had to get out of Tucson real quick when I got involved with methamphetamine because one of my relatives was connected to the guys I was hanging out with. It
Mm.
didn't go so well for those guys. So I ended up going back, flew back into Baltimore International, went back to Virginia, and I was homeless. My parents were like, "No, you're not coming back. This is '98. You're not coming back and staying with us." I had one of my homies from New York was out there. He and his mom allowed me to stay with them. Then he went to prison for 4 years for shooting at somebody, and then I just bounced around and started hooking up equipment. There's there's a culture in DC, one part of Maryland and Northern Virginia is called go-go. It's go-go music.
Mm.
In the 60s is like funk soul, and then hip hop started to influence it big time. Within the 90s, it became this huge scene of just gang members going into these live shows, and it became extremely violent in the 90s. And I would set up equipment and carry equipment for good friends of mine or brothers in my gang, and that way I had somewhere to go all the time. And then I started doing a lot of ecstasy,
Mm-hmm.
um, acid all the time. And then I was at one of those go-go's, and well, before that happened, I went to the military in '98. That's right. My parents gave me an ultimatum and said, you know what, you go, to the service, you can stay with us. I went to MEPS in Maryland. I passed. Wasn't really educated, but I passed.
Mm-hmm.
Plus, I'm colorblind, so like, okay, you could be a '92 Yankee, which is supplies, like shipping and receiving of weapons, armor. Be the numbers guy, and I enjoy doing that. But the reality is, I'm an addict, and I
Mm-hmm.
loved getting high, and I love
Mm-hmm.
drinking. So I don't care if it was the president of the United States telling me to stop drinking and getting high and get my stuff together. I continued to do so, and I was honorably discharged in the same year.
Yeesh. Mm.
My mom lost it. That was the the one time she like truly lost it, destroyed my room, broke the pictures, threw the dresser. Like she was so hurt, and
Mm-hmm.
I went back to setting up equipment on the streets and going around DC, Maryland, Virginia, going to these shows and doing all this dope and drinking and having sex and getting STDs and passing it around. And at one of these clubs, gunshots rang out, and I heard the distress call from one of my guys. I ran on stage, unzipped the keyboard bag, passed out a bunch of Glocks, handguns, turned around, and I saw it happening. But I saw somebody about to hit somebody else in the head with a 17-inch Mac light. But the guy that had it, which is one of my guys, his brother pushed him, and he grabbed it, and he was like, "Stop, man, you're out of control." And he threw it against the cinder block wall, but he hit my head instead. It gave me a stroke.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it was that bad. I couldn't move. I could think, but I was just laying in a puddle of blood, and there's gunshots going on everywhere. Everybody's screaming, "O-Dog got shot. Omen got shot." I didn't get shot, but from all the blood they thought I did through a window, and that changed my life, man. That one really got me. That I stuttered for a while, and the hospital in Virginia that they took me to released me that night without a CAT scan. There was no paperwork. They just sent me away because there's so many gang members that were in that lobby, and they were all fired up, and a lot of stuff was going on out there. I don't know, because I was in the back room with one of my older brothers, and they shaved my head, man. I had long hair, and they shaved where I got the fracture, and it dented my skull. They stitched it up and sent me on my way, man. And I had to deal with it myself for the rest of my life. And I started doing a lot of cocaine to numb that. And that was the first time I really got involved in cocaine, but that lasted many, many years until I couldn't snort cocaine no more because my nose would just bleed. And then I had two females call. I was staying at somebody's basement, I was hungover and needed more dope and alcohol, and he was gone going to get whatever, and the phone rang. I picked it up. One of my homegirls said, "I'm pregnant," and I was like, "Okay, cool. Let me call you in the morning." 10 minutes later or so, phone rang again. I heard a female crying, and I was like, "What's up?" And she was like, "Joel, I'm pregnant." And I'm like, "What?" Because my other friend, it was a friend of mine. Just one of my friends from the neighborhood. We'd have sex all the time. It wasn't a relationship. This girl came from a very, very good family. Father was in the Navy out of Bethesda, and got her pregnant. First one ended up not being mine, even though I showed up for that one. I didn't show up for this one, and she ended up being mine. And I got tired of her saying, and I'm moving slow, man, from this stroke and doing a lot of dope, and she has no idea what I'm about. My girlfriend in high school didn't even know what I was about until she read my book, and she was in shock. So I got tired of my daughter's mom saying, "Hey, look, like I need diapers. I know I got a good family and we got money, but I still need to be around. Need money for JCPenney pictures, photos. Do you even want to show up? What's going on here?" So that became like a multiple time a day thing. And while I was jumping from house to house, trying to just survive and protect my head from violence, I had two people approach me and say, "Hey, look, we're about to pull a jewelry store heist on the county on the other side of the bridge of Washington, D.C." And I didn't trust one of them, never have. The other one I did trust. He's the one that ended up giving me a stroke and hit me in the head on accident. And I said, "I'm going to think about it." And then eventually they were just like, like, what's it going to be? I'm getting pages on my pager. We didn't have cell phones back then. And she's just like, "Hey, like, I need this, I need that, I need this." And it irritated me to my core, man. And my resentment towards her just added on top of all the other thousands of resentments I never dealt with in my life. And I ended up going and getting a Scream mask from the movie Scream. I dressed in all black like the Omen, and we went and pulled a jewelry store heist. Problem is, what my buddies didn't know was I found out when I turned myself in that the dry cleaners was robbed like a few days before that, and that whole dwelling where Safeway was and everything was already being watched because people were robbing that. They were watching it the whole time. I escaped. I went to Florida. That's when I ended up turning myself in for my father. And I went and I did my time, and my buddies got on the stand and they testified against me.
Wow. And so I want to stop briefly right here. We'll get back to this story or story right there. But one of the things that I notice a lot with stories of struggling with addiction and things like that is there's always moments where you can stop, reflect, and be like, okay, I'm going to turn it all around. And so you seem to have had several right there where it could have been possible. Your short stint in the military, right? The stroke, the surprise your daddy kind of wake up, right? And so none of those moments really kind of redirected you to to stop what you're doing and maybe straighten up, right? But now you're here, you're kind of back, and I hate to say back where you started, but judging by your friends kind of flipping on you like they did earlier in life, you're back at it, right? And it seems to be kind of like a constant circle of that, right? And so is how much deeper does it go here after the robbery?
I ended up doing a life learning program in Manassas. I was locked up there. That's where like the DC sniper, Muhammad and Malvo were incarcerated. Terrified getting locked up, man. I'd gotten locked up with a stolen car. I didn't steal it. The guy that let me borrow it didn't steal it. There was a crew of kids up in Detroit at a car lot that were getting it. And they were selling it for less than $1,000 a piece. Mm-hmm. So I was about to take the rap for that. And then my lawyer came out and was like, you're an idiot. Get your head out your ass. You seem like you're an intelligent kid. Like you're about to do all this time for Grand Theft Auto and grand larceny. And you didn't even take the car. Like, what is your problem? He said, I don't never want to see you here again. But again, my life was fueled by resentments. My entire life just continued to go on a downward spiral because I didn't know how to handle situations that baffled me, man. And at this point, everything freaking baffled me. So I do this life learning program. It's faith-based. I didn't know what I was walking into when somebody wrote me from there. And I go in, it's this huge pod full of men, full of bunk beds. I'd already been locked up across in this other facility where it's much, much different. So now I'm starting to, going in there, it's a lot, like the story behind that is just intriguing. But the night that I went in and there's only one bunk open and it's a top bunk, and I fear heights more than I fear death.
Oh.
Plus I've had a stroke and I've been beaten to a pulp a half dozen times now.
Right.
I didn't want to sleep on that bunk. And the CO was a God-fearing man, and he said, look, man, you gotta do this. We're not sending you back to the other facility tonight. So I need you to sleep on there tonight. Wake up, maybe you'll have a different outlook. And I got up there, and brother, when I finally got the courage to do that, and the lights were off, the dim lights were still on. People, when I was walking through the aisle, they're like, Omen. And I didn't know who it was, but I knew there was people in there, and they weren't my gang, but they were people that we all went to high school with and stuff. So I get on there, and as soon as I lay down, I'm terrified too, man. Like I'm on my stomach, like so I can kind of hold the bottom of the bunk where the other dude's sleeping. As soon as I did that, man, like spirits started coming out the wall and started coming out of the ground. I freaked out and I got up and I'm like trying to wake these dudes up, and I go to holler at the CO and the light's off in his office and he's not there. The next thing you know, they're pulling me from the bunk and I'm screaming like a child and I'm like pleading for help, and they slam me onto the hard floor and I'm trying to hold on to the bottom of the bunk and grab dudes' toes at the same time. And they just surround me, they grab me and they drag me through that pod, through his dark office and through a dark hallway as I'm screaming and trying to like claw my way back. And then it snapped out of it. I jumped up and the CEO is standing there, his lights on in his office. He just, with his finger, he's pointing like, come here. It wasn't real to anybody else. And I go in there and I'm crying, and he closes the door and he brings the Bible and he opens the Bible up and he's like, evil is coming for you, son. He's like, do you know your name is in the Bible, the book of Joel? He's a prophet. And I'm just bawling, man. He said, I've seen young men like you go through what you're going through. And here's your opportunity in life to change this now, because our Father loves you, son. And he starts reading, and he's like, do you believe that, the Lord died on the cross for your sins? And I'm bawling. I am bawling, but I'm looking around me, in that hallway that they were dragging me in, and I'm like making sure they're not coming back.
Mm-hmm.
I ended up completing that program, man, and I excelled in it in every way. I stopped cussing, while I was there. I respected everybody, made sure everybody was okay. Not being so passive anymore as I was as a child. And then I went through the court thing, and they told on me on their behalf. One of them said, you know what? When he was on the stand, he was like, look, like, where's the fourth suspect at? And he pointed at me, said my name. And I was so pissed, man, and hurt and resentful. And he was like, he didn't say I was in the jewelry store. He didn't say any of that. He said, I dropped them off around that area about that time.
Mm-hmm.
That's all he said. So in his eyes, he didn't tell. On my eyes, I'm like, dude, I'm going to kill you when I get out. The other one that hit me in the head and gave me a stroke, he gets on the stand. He says I was there, but I was never in the jewelry store. I was in a tree being a lookout. So he put me at the scene.
Mm-hmm.
No physical evidence. I've been lying to my lawyer the entire time, saying I've been in Florida with the woman I've been sleeping with, which I was when I took off down there after the everybody else got incarcerated. But I got out, and everything I learned about God and my opening my heart to Him and being there for my daughter and her mom, and even though she came in and was like, full custody, it's ours, not yours. You're about to get hit all this money for child support, even though you're locked up. I was clear minded, man, that whole time, and I dealt with it, and I didn't have a resentment towards her anymore.
Mm-hmm.
I said, I'm gonna come out and I'm gonna change my life. And the reality was, where am I gonna start? My parents aren't gonna let me back in.
Mm-hmm.
Going from house to house still, and the second that one of my homies let me stay with them and his mom and dad, I ended up having sex with his sister like an hour later when I came out the bathroom because I finally had a nice shower. I was having sex with her the whole time, which made it awkward. So I just left and ended up drinking again and setting up equipment. I went to a club in DC one night with my buddies, and at this point I was off probation. I went up there, and my buddies got in this huge fight, and I felt the evil manifesting in the club, and I watched everything as it unraveled, and they weren't even paying attention. And like two huge groups merged into one. My buddies were like 10 deep. They're like 30 deep. They just all out riot in front of the stage. And I was trying to warn them. I was getting thrown on the ground because I'm a little dude. I'm trying to protect my head. And I walk outside, man, and I ended up, one of my boys said, Omen, watch out. And it was just me and him and this huge crowd outside. All our other homies were gone talking to girls up the street. By the time I could even realize what he was saying, like I got jumped for a long time by grown men.
Mm-hmm.
They stripped my Timberlands off me. They ripped my shirt off. They pounced on me, man. They did major damage. I saw a light, and then when I saw another group of guys coming up, I thought for a split second that they were going to help out and like get me out of there. And then they moved the other guys out the way and they started getting their licks in.
Mm.
I mean, right now, at that point, I'm 5'3", 108 pounds, and they're breaking me. And yeah, man, I've had a lot of physical punishment, and I got a resentment for the guy that called my name out because he ran and went to go get our guys. They weren't close enough, and he just left me there to die. Yeah, man, it's